Dr. Goodell, I want to ask you a question too, because I saw it a few times in the chat, and it's about sort of creating a list of medical schools to apply to. I know, there's some medical schools that may value more people in the local vicinity, that kind of community. So when you're, talking to a pre-med student who may be applying just and just start getting started and being interested in applying broadly and wanting to really become a doctor, how would you advise them to create a list of medical schools to apply to? Would you say that they should be, only apply to schools in their area, apply broadly? How would you go about making a list?
Yeah, so first of all, where the variety of experiences one can have for undergraduate education is massive, right? Big school, tiny school, urban school, rural school, like specific engineering school versus like liberal arts, whatever. Huge variety. In medical schools, the variety is like this, okay? If we're talking about allopathic medical schools, there are, I think, 156 of them, and they're very close in size. So this should be reassuring to you. And this is like a preface of what I'm going to say, because any medical school in the United States that you get into is going to get you to your goal, which should be a doctor. And while there are some differences, they're just not that big. So, okay, that being said, you still have to figure out, like, all right, that's great, but how am I going to decide out of these 156? How am I going to decide which 25 to apply to? So one important point is to figure out who you are and what you are excited about, what you are passionate about, and then find the schools that fit you. And also, when you're finding the schools, as opposed to trying to make yourself the perfect applicant that can optimize your chances of getting into every medical school, like just figure out who you are and what you need and what you're excited about, and find the schools that fit you. Now, part of it is what you're excited about. Also, part of it is like other things, like your academic metrics, right? And also geography. Maybe you're like, I need to be kind of near my family. I don't think I can move, blah, blah, blah. So when those are all considerations to think about when building your school list, when it comes to things like, one thing that I would point you in the direction of is the MSAR, which is the Medical School Admissions Requirements. That's the publication by the AAMC. Like, they get the data from the medical schools, and it includes things like, what's the average MCAT score and the range? What is the average GPA and the range? What are the deadlines? It tells you where it is. It tells you if it has certain programs. And happily, there is this new section that's an expanded mission section, where some schools, I'm excited, including ours, have taken the opportunity to really tell you, like, look, this is what we're all about. Now, not all medical schools have an obvious niche, but when there is one, you should think about whether that's a good fit for you. If you're like, all right, say you're practically a genius with your like 4.0 and your MCAT of 525, and you basically could do whatever you want. And you're like, I don't know, I feel like I should go to WashU in St. Louis or Hopkins or something, but like, I don't know, I'm really more of a primary care gal. Then like, please go to a primary care school. You know what I mean? Like, do the thing that is good for you, not just whatever. So pay attention to things like metrics and what's possible, yes, but then also look at the schools that are the best fit for you in other ways as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I want to piggyback off that a little bit to Mr. Taylor, because, you mentioned things like having, obviously having a good GPA and a good MCAT score is helpful, but some students may have had experiences where early on in college, they may not have had the highest GPA. And, they're working on additional things to help boost that up over the years. Mr. Taylor, do you look at trajectory? Do you look at the experiences someone's had after maybe some bad grades early on in an experience? And how can somebody overcome, a lower GPA at some point, or, somebody who's applying with that being their weakness?
The way you overcome a lower GPA on the front end is to show a higher GPA on the back end. Difficult and demanding course loads. I mean, schools know the difference between, and every school out there has these less difficult courses where you can probably ace them very easily. You've got to show, that you can function under a load. Our first semester has pretty much twice what anybody will take as an undergraduate load in a semester. So you've got to be able to show us that you can overcome that. But I tell you, another great value in doing that, getting it together, it shows a person that matures. It gives demonstration of something you're really looking for. And sometimes you're just having to guess whether it's there or not. But when you see somebody that's really pulled it together and overcome a difficult, slow start, that's an important thing to see. It also demonstrates a person who can change. And change is such a critical thing, because when what gets you to the front door of medical school will not get you through. Will not get you through. You have to change and adjust. It's a different world, and you've got to be ready to change in the world. And what we tell our students, on the first day of medical school, up until today, 90% of you are used to being in the top 10% of your class. As of today, 90% of you are not in the top 10% of your class. And the look that goes across the room when you tell people that's reality. That's exactly the way it is. So they've got to be able to change and adjust and adapt to the ever-changing situation, which is medical school and medicine.
And that resilience, right? That ability
Right.
to change and be resilient is so important. And Dr. Goodell, then one way that students can show that resilience and that ability to adapt and change is through the personal statement.
Mhm.
So when you're reviewing a personal statement, how would you advise somebody to write in such a way that really conveys why they want to become a physician, what challenges they've overcome, and what really stands out when you're reviewing somebody's personal statement then?
So I think the most important thing in the personal statement is to be clear and sincere. And it does not need to be unique. Frankly, like I read more than personally read more than 1,000 applications every cycle. So it is really hard to make a personal statement that I remember. And if I remember it, it probably has more to do with very unusual circumstances that you have no control over. Like I'll just remember like, wow, that's really dramatic, but it's like, wasn't really something that you did necessarily. So don't worry about standing out or having a unique reason for going to medical school or having like a life-changing experience. Or suddenly I realized I had to be a doctor. Like not the case for most people. What we really want to know is why are you going to medical school and why do you think you'll be great at it? And just tell us that as clearly as you possibly can. That actually is what stands out. I often find myself when I'm writing my notes on the application, I often find myself writing, I'll note the fact that motivation seems very sincere. And I don't know how else to put it. It's just that like the combination of the words they use to describe why they want to do this, backed up by their personal experiences, all kind of hangs together and makes sense. And I find myself looking at the whole application and being like, yeah, I totally get it. Makes perfect sense to me, And the other thing I would say about the personal statement is, of course, you should have somebody proofread it for you, but actually, and it should be written kind of funny, like formal, but not too sanitized, if that makes sense. So when I'm really trying to understand why somebody is going to medical school, I usually just ask them. I had an entire day of advising yesterday. And the first thing I did when people sat down is it said like, so first of all, just tell me, like, why is it that you want to go to medical school? And literally all of these people were then showing me their personal statements. And I was like, okay, so the thing you said about your dad and his physical therapy practice and how it felt so like homey and like family there. And he cared about the whole person. I was like, that story should go in there. That sounds like a big motivator to you. And it's fine to just go ahead and tell us like, my dad is a role model for the kind of caretaker that I want to be someday or whatever, So anyway, just being clear and not worrying that you need to like add in some impressive, like grand generalizations about the state of medicine because you think that's what, like, just clear and sincere.
That makes a lot of sense. And you make a great point about the dots connecting because people have a lot of different experiences. And when looking back and kind of prepping an application, it's helpful to make those dots connect in some way that really conveys a story or an idea of, okay, how did this person decide that they want to become a physician? And then how did they get to this point today to where they're applying? And I think connecting those dots is a very, very helpful thing. But in that process, I'm going to ask you, Dr. Ovanet, some people may make some mistakes. Some people may kind of have some hiccups along the way or not put together their application maybe in a way that truly conveys who they are. So what are some of the mistakes, the big mistakes, the kind of glaring errors that people make, and how would you address them? How would you tell, the group of over 700 people watching right now, what they should avoid doing, or some of the things that you've seen people do that kind of maybe hurt their chances a little bit?
Yeah. So the one most notable thing for us it's like a lead balloon in our committee when people write this incredibly graphic description of a severe trauma or the smell of the burning skin in the OR. We're like, oh, like, what are you doing? Like, you do not need to prove to us that you're not going to pass out during third year. So, I think that sometimes creative writing, like, I said this, Dr. Goodell said this, you are not getting any grades for creative writing. We just literally want to hear why you want to be a doctor. So we've had applications, usually the ones I remember are terrible. Like, we had someone who applied decades ago. This is when I was a medical student, but I still remember it's like single white female in search of a medical school. And it was written like a wanted ad in the Penny Saver, which probably none of you know what that means, but just like not super creative, out of the box is not good. We just want to hear why you want to be a doctor. Like, that is what we want to hear. The other thing I will say is when you talk about shadowing, hero worshiping doctors, like, oh, the doctor saved everyone, it was all perfect, and come across as a little bit of credulous or naive. Like, what we want to hear about is that patient-physician relationship, why you see yourself in that doctor's shoes one day you can't know what it's like to be a doctor until you actually are one, but just like with a little bit of humility, like, doctors aren't saving the world. Like, even if you saw one ER doctor pull someone through a code, like, recognizing that as a physician, you're not going to go and code 100 people and save them all. So just kind of having a little bit of true insight into the medical profession rather than platitudes. I would say, like, someone asked about, and I know this is stepping on the personal statement answer, but just like tell a story, like, that you are moved by. I saw this patient who was newly diagnosed with breast cancer and the way the physician handled it. And it was really difficult. And hopefully in the future, I'd like to do this type of thing. Like, just tell a story of something that you witnessed. Yeah, I think that answers it. That would probably be the biggest mistake. And the other thing is just like, the box checkers, I know Mr. Taylor mentioned, often it's just like, I did this and I did that and I did the other. It's like, I don't care. I can see that. What I want to know is, like, what did you learn from that? Like, it's great that you did that, but what did you learn from it? Like, what about that experience overseas or in a local shelter for people who are experiencing homelessness? Like, what about that experience made you want to be a doctor?
Yeah.
Dan, I want to add
Go for it, please. Absolutely.
just a couple of brief thoughts on that. Make sure you're adding information there that's not found elsewhere in the application. I know, at least at my school, there's a very good probability that my committee members are going to read your experiences before they read your personal statement. So don't repeat yourself there. And when it comes down to writing your personal statement, write what you've got to say, be succinct, send the extra information you want them to have, and then stop writing. You don't have to fill up that whole space. You run a real risk in doing that if you just fill up the whole space, because there's a possibility there's something really important at the end. And by the time any of us or any of our committee members have read a couple of thousand applications, chance of you reading every word in that thing is not very good, and you might miss something if there's something very important that comes at the end. So write what you've got to say and stop.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. But then on that same topic of making sure that people are kind of doing things that make sense, what are some of the mistakes you've seen people make, or what are some of the red flags that have really kind of hurt applicants in the past? Because you mentioned you've been doing this for decades and decades. So what are some of those serious mistakes that people should avoid making?
Oh, I think my colleagues here have gone over most of those over and over. Just, don't bore the reader. Give them something that excites them, make them want to know more about you. We had an applicant once who was telling us about their altruism, about how many times they had stopped and saved turtles out of the middle of the road. Okay, that's a little different, but coming from where we come from, maybe it's not so different. But in any case, the things in there, most people, you see the same things. How many times have y'all seen tick, 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 the clock on the emergency room wall tell us what's different about you. Where'd you get your motivation? What's fanned your flames? What's brought you to this point in your life? And that's what you put in there. And it's a mistake to do otherwise. And it's a mistake to say the same thing over and over and over throughout. But a lot of us are conditioned to do that. You got to fill up the whole space. Please don't.
Definitely, definitely. Dr. Goodell, I want to ask you a question that I saw a few times in the chat as well. I want to make sure we get to it. And it's on the topic of letters of recommendation. So obviously students need to ask for letters of recommendation and submit them. Any sort of criteria that you look for or would recommend for students to ask for letters of recommendation? Does it have to be science professors? Does it have to be certain teachers? Does it have to be from experiences? How would you sort of guide someone who's saying, hey, I don't have any letters of recommendation, I want to apply in the next year or two? How should I go about collecting those letters of recommendation, and who should I be asking?
Yeah, so different medical schools have different rules about this. So some medical schools have a rule that like they need to see 2 letters from a science professor or something like that. We actually got rid of those requirements because we found that so often they weren't helpful, and it actually really came up during COVID. We had all these people that were taking, biology and chemistry remotely, and they hadn't had a chance to get to know professors very well, and it was just ended up being sort of useless. So for us, the most important thing, and the reason we got rid of that requirement, is because we really want letters from people that know you. And the best bet is to get people that know you, to get your different letter writers to be from different settings. So we like to have somebody that can speak to your academic work in a classroom or lab setting. So like, sure, it could be a science professor, but better off if you've got a smaller, more high level course with a lab where the person could really talk about, what stood out about you in the classroom. It's also great to get letters from people that know you in a different setting, like a work setting. People might not think about it, but like sports coaches, people who've coached you in a musical instrument, and people who have seen you work in a team, any kind of a team, all of the volunteer experiences, all of those things are great. They're going to tell us different things about you. And what we want is for those letters to really add to the information that we have in the application. Right. So like, it's one thing for us to say, wow, this person's done a lot of service activities. They must really care about people. And it's another thing to get a letter. And this is one I got this year, a letter from a person who had supervised an applicant at his paid job where he worked in a group home for people with, I think it was autism. And this supervisor, who is not a physician, was just the guy running the home, said, this young man is our best staff member. And here's why. It's because he was somehow able to connect with people that nobody else had been able to connect with. And it's because he handled lots of very difficult situations with people throwing things at him or people being very upset. And he managed to maintain like calm and respect towards everyone, even those, and talked about how he went out of his way to like celebrate people's birthdays. Showed up with a cake one time for somebody who was a less well-liked resident of this group home, and he was afraid that something bad would happen on his birthday. And so even though he wasn't working that day, he showed up with a cake. And I was like, that's beautiful. Like, this is a great person. So somebody that knows you and can speak to some special things about you. I think it was Doug that was talking about sports before. I can remember a couple of letters I've had from coaches that said, frankly, like, yeah, this person was not the best player on the team, but she sat there and supported everybody, sat there on the bench and supported everybody for 3 years. And that's why she got to be captain in the 4th year. You know what I mean? It was just like those are great. So yeah, letters from people who know you in different settings.
I love it. And so I wish that we could do the session for hours and hours and hours, because there's so much valuable information here, and we could see it by all those questions that are popping up in the Q&A. But obviously we can't get through everything. And so we have just a few minutes left. So in 1 minute or less, I'm going to ask each one of you for your biggest piece of advice, the thing that you want to make sure everyone takes away from this panel, because, honestly, this is the one chance that people have to really hear directly from the people who are reviewing applications. So I'm going to start with you, Mr. Taylor. In 1 minute or less, what's your biggest piece of advice to pre-meds?
Quoting an old fellow that used to walk around this area here by the name of David Crockett, who said, make sure you're right, then go ahead. make sure this is what you want to do. As you're pursuing your schools, as you want to pick the schools you want to go visit the schools, put your feet on the ground, get a feeling for the school, the students, the community, everything about it. And that's how you'll pick where you think you'll go to school. That's my biggest piece of advice.
I love it. I love it. Thanks so much. Dr. Robinette, your answer?
I'm gonna say I don't have a quote. Just apply, like many people are hung up on the gap years, just looking at this, like, make sure you want to be a doctor. There's so many warm fuzzies. Oops, I talk with my hands. Make sure you want to be a doctor. There's so many warm fuzzies growing up when you say, oh, I want to be a doctor when I grow up. Everyone's excited. I think Mr. Taylor mentioned grandma motivation can't get you along. Just make sure it's really what you want to do with your life. And then apply early with your best application. We don't care at all about gap years. Like, they're great. Or if you're ready straight through, that's terrific too. But make sure you have taken time to really discern that you want to be a physician, get the experience, community service, research, whatever it is you want to kind of best put yourself the best self forward, and then apply to medical school.
Perfect. Thanks so much. And Dr. Goodell, your answer?
Mine is, it's like a little bit similar to my colleagues, but I guess I would say, like, do what you love. That should actually be, do what you love and what is right for you. So, like, what you do, you have all the votes in deciding what you should do, right? Mom and dad love you a lot, but they don't get to decide what you do for your whole entire future. They're paying your tuition maybe right now, so like maybe let them do that. But generally, you have all of the votes. So that is true about the timing of when you apply to medical school. That's true about the different activities that you choose. When you're doing that, choose the things that you are the most excited about, as opposed to like what you think somebody else told you should do, or what you think looks the best or whatever. Do the thing that you're excited about. You are going to be the best at it. If you're excited about something, you're going to put more of yourself into it. You're going to be more proud of it. When you talk about it, it'll be more sincere. You'll get more out of it. All of those make a much, much better physician, honestly, than anything else. And it's sort of what Doug said before. Like, this is actually too hard to do if you don't really, really, really want to do it. So go ahead and do the things that you are psyched about. And if they line up with medicine, great, and then make your career around that.
I love it. The three of you have been fantastic. You've answered so many questions directly to students, and this was so valuable to hear from the three of you. Thank you so much for taking the time out on your Saturday to answer questions for students and to really make a difference. And I see everyone in the chat thanking you so much. So this was fantastic. Really